last talk for today, but not least, is by Geoffrey Canada, who is president of Harlem's Children's Zone, and he will talk to us about the monsters in children's lives still there 26 years later.
First of all, thank you, and I was fairly stress-free until that last 10 minutes. I have to tell you, it felt a little toxic there, but I thought that was interesting because people react differently to other people in this country, and depending on what side of that dynamic you're on, your life can be really miserable. And I just think there are some folk who have grown up with that as just part of their being. So I wanted to celebrate the fact that we have at the Harlem Children's Zone a generation of young people who've grown up under our support. And Barbara has mentioned that she came to visit us 20 years ago, and she's one of the few people who actually understand we were not a school and we were not an academic organization when Barbara came to see us. I was trying to transform Harlem from a toxic community that had deteriorating buildings that were crumbling. It had open drug markets right out in front of the children. It was filth everywhere. You looked at a place that whenever I go to these places in the country, I know these kids are not going to make it. You just know that. And our belief was that we could change that. Now, look, a lot of people have written about our work, and we've been on a lot of shows and everything else, but very few people understand what we were really trying to do. Was I trying to educate a generation of kids and get them to college? I was, and we did. We did that. But that wasn't the real point of this. The real point was trying to figure out how you go into a community that had, for all intents and purposes, become toxic to its children and change that dynamic so children have a chance. And what's fascinating to me 20 years later and being here today is there's a lot of research, right, that's now proving what we believed. And for those of you who know me, you know that I am unfettered by the need to do random controlled, studies and peer-reviewed paper. I don't have to do any of that stuff. I can just fundamentally believe something, right, is good, and I can do it. And it's true. I mean, I'm laughing, but I'm not really laughing because the fact of the matter is, what were we trying to do? We were trying to eliminate the dirt and the filth. We were trying to plant trees. We were trying to clean up the spaces so families could take their kids back into the parks and into the playgrounds. We were trying to do things that we thought any normal human being would want for their kids. That's been my standard of research. If all of you want it, then I want it for my kids, right? But I'm being serious about this. And people in this country somehow feel like we can't afford to do that. So what else can we do if we don't do that, right? And the answer is that we haven't figured out what else we can really do that's really going to level the playing field. Now, if we want to keep a permanent underclass, we can do half of what we think we ought to do, right? Jonathan, you could build a place, but don't make it very nice. Don't give folks green trees. I mean, you could do that, right? And it'll be better than what people have right now. But we won't level the playing field about this kind of stuff. And I think if you're an American and you believe in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, that we have to level the playing field, and we have to at least do it within a generation. So this issue of, I know that there would be very few people who would be willing to fund our work if we were talking about what happens to children when they grow up in places that other people wouldn't dare raise their own children in. Somehow that was an ineffective fundraising strategy. Now, people absolutely will support if you can demonstrate very concrete goals in terms of school achievement and graduation and college acceptance. That is fundable. But we didn't have the concept of toxic stress. And I remember the first time Barbara mentioned this to me, we were at a board meeting, and I was like, yes, that is it. I didn't know what it was, but I knew, right, that this thing existed and that when it happened, it damaged kids, it damaged them for most of their lives. I had seen it, I had experienced it, I knew it to be real, and part of, I think, what has driven me has been that I was convinced about this decades ago. I was convinced, I didn't know there was a field, I didn't know what it was called. I was convinced that this thing was impacting poor kids in a way that we as a country was ignoring. And one of the reasons I say why the monsters in children's lives are still there 26 years later, why I named my talk that, is that I actually wrote something about this 26 years ago. And I'm going to read what I wrote. If you listen to that, you have to realize this was before the Harlem Children's Zone. It's before I met Barbara. In fact, I was looking around the room, it was before some of you were born in this room. It's like one of these things, you're getting kind of old here. But I was as convinced that it was important then as I am right now. And the fact that now we have more evidence about it sort of makes me hope that our country will take this thing seriously, that they will really put real investments in dealing with this issue and making sure children don't have to deal with this. So there are a couple of areas I want to talk about this is for all the scientists in here. I've admitted I'm not a scientist, but I have a pretty good track record. I feel like the lawyer for Stormy Daniels who keeps saying, right? I have a good track record, right? So far, everything I've said has come true. All right, skip over that segue and let me get back to this issue. There's some things going on in America right now that we should be very concerned about because the pervasiveness of this toxic experience for children, I'm afraid, is growing. So here's one of the things I want to talk about, which is homelessness. And in fact, in this country, homelessness is now just becoming a standard operating procedure for families and children in America. It is staggering the numbers in New York City, just staggering. It's as bad as it's ever been. And guess what? All the housing costs in New York City are only going one way. They're going up. Now, how are we going to find an answer to this when all around the country they've torn down the housing projects and they've built what? They've built few places poor people can afford to live. And yet, anyone who's read, I think, a seminal book, that Evicted, and you begin to understand what happens to children and families when they lose their homes. So the reason I'm so convinced about being right about things, I'm going to just confess this to you all. I believe most people are like me, right? Now, you scientists, y'all are like, yeah, you can't believe that, Jeff. That's the whole problem. That is so biased. But that's what I believe, right? And so when I go through stuff in my own life, I say, I bet other kids have felt the same way. And I bet other people experience the same way. So this is how I understood homelessness. My mother, Barbara knows her. Today she's 88. She raised 4 boys by herself. While she's an educated woman now, she didn't have the degrees then. She worked at very menial jobs and Our survival was very borderline, but she hid it from us. We didn't know as kids. And that's where parents can be great protectives, right? They can be great protectors of children when you can hide these things from kids. And that was going well, and then something happened. I imagine she lost her job. And we had to stay, because she had to work. We had to stay in a rooming situation where we had a downstairs person who was allowing us to use the upstairs bedrooms. There are traumas that in life you never forget. And this was one of those traumas. So we move in. The woman seems to be a very nice lady. My mother is saying, well, I have to leave my kids there when they go to school. School is right across the street. They come home, and I'll be home around 5:30, 6 o'clock. And she's, oh, that's fine. Everything will be great. And outside, she had some dogs. She had 2 dogs. And she was saying, well, the brown one's nice, but you have to worry about the one right there with the pink nose. That one there is very dangerous. So we were like, whoa. Now, I was only in the 2nd grade. And we looked, that was fine. My mother went to work. And then when we got home from school at 3:30, into our area comes Mrs. Collins. And she has the 2 dogs. And she says to us, don't move. So the 4 of us stand there, 4 little frozen black boys, while that dog with the pink nose comes over and sniffs each one of us. And we're terrified. She goes through our stuff and she leaves. So mother comes back home. She says, everything's fine. Everything's fine. The next day, same thing. It just becomes a ritual. Every day she comes up with the dogs. We stand there petrified, not moving a muscle. And then she leaves. Well, this went on one day. My mother was saying, well, look, I have to go out, and I'm going to leave y'all with Miss Collins. And my youngest brother, he was only in kindergarten. He starts to cry. And she asks him, what's wrong? And he tells her about the dogs and the lady bringing the dogs there. And my mother couldn't put, and she looked at those of us who were older. I was the 3rd, I had 2 older, but why didn't y'all say anything? And she just can't believe we didn't tell her. And we were so afraid of becoming homeless. We knew this for us was the end of the road. After this, we had nowhere to go. And we thought the lady would put us out if we ever told. My mother did something I had never seen her do. She started to cry. Now, forget the dog. That was terrifying. Watching my mother cry, that was earth-shattering. I was like to myself, oh my God, we're really in trouble. I thought she had it all together. This thing could go bad at any given moment. That moment when you realize the world is out of control and you're vulnerable and there's nobody there to really protect. That was 2nd grade. Never forgotten it. Part of the security we all think about every day, that gets damaged as a kid. You begin to lose your confidence, your faith, your belief in a future with any security whatsoever. I can't even imagine, Jose, what it's like every single day to worry whether or not this is going to be the day when the bad. I just can't even imagine what that's like to grow up like that. I know what it was like for us when we were young, trying to figure out whether or not we were going to have a roof over our head. The 4 of us looking at our mother, hoping that she could hold it together. So we've got a homelessness crisis in our country, and I think our children are going to be damaged. I'm going to say something else about violence. You know, I wrote Fist Stick Knife Gun in '94 because in the inner cities of America, I watched what happened to kids when they began to be threatened by sudden death. It just, in the mid to late 80s and 90s in New York and in most of the inner cities, crack epidemic came in, and also what came in was just wholesale slaughter of young people. And it changes you when you have no reason to be able to predict how long you will live and you're 14. It changes your sense of priorities. It changes your sense of what's important. It changes your view of the world. There weren't a lot of guns around when I was growing up in the Bronx. But my first experience shook me up. It was eye-opening. So I was in the 6th grade, and I had this interesting thing. I used to hang with the older guys, right? They were all 14, 15. I was younger, 12. And we were standing on the corner playing checkers on top of a car outside, and it's one of the tenement buildings in the South Bronx. And I saw the numbers runner guy, which we all knew. It's one of those things in the Bronx where everybody knew the numbers runner. He was running by. It's the first time I'd ever seen a gun. He had a little silver pistol in his hand, and he was running by, and he was limping. And two things occurred to me at 12. First, all of us looked at him, but I was the only one that kept looking at him. Everybody else went back to life as if nothing had happened. And I thought that was a little strange. And then he stopped at the corner and started coming back our way. And I turned around and I saw a woman pointing a rifle across the street about 20 yards away, tracking him as he was running. And I realized that she probably was going to pull the trigger right as he crossed behind me. And I did what any normal human being would do. I ran. I ran right up the steps into the hallway and ran right into the numbers runner, who then put the gun in my face, not knowing who I was. And I thought he was going to kill me. But he was a pretty professional criminal, right? He wasn't panicked by, a 12-year-old running up on him. And he just looked at me and said, "You stupid ass," right? And he kept going. So now I'm sitting in the hallway thinking about the woman outside with the gun, waiting for the first person to come out of the building to shoot. Meanwhile, the guy with the gun's going down. So I sit there. I thought I sat there for hours. It probably was only 10, 15 minutes. And I'm realizing all my friends, these are all my dear, dear friends. I know they're out there. They're panicked. What happened to Jeff? We lost. So I go outside, and they look up, and they say, "What the F is wrong with you? Don't you know better to run when somebody points a gun?" And that was it. And I wanted to say, no, I don't know better than that. I'm 12. What do you know about guns when you're 12? The thing I understood was that they knew something about survival I didn't know. And that one mistake could have cost me my life. And I decided, you better really focus on this violence thing. You better become an expert on this, because you may not get a second chance. I wonder what it's like to be a kid in the 6th grade or the 8th grade and to realize that people routinely come into schools to murder children. That is just a regular, routine thing happening in our country. You know how traumatized that school, forget, the whole school is traumatized. The whole community is traumatized. You can't say Columbine without one thing coming into your mind. But so it is at so many different places in this country as this just becomes a routine. And I'm going to tell you this. I'm one of the people who the gun industry, the NRA, keeps saying, If you start with, little gun reforms, they're gonna want to take all your guns. Well, yeah, I want to take all the guns. I'm their guy. I've been trying to stay off TV so they all can't point and say, that's what we told you was the plan. But I don't get it. I don't get the trauma of allowing a whole generation of young people in our country to grow up thinking that's normal. What I learned in the South Bronx, they thought it was normal, right? You see a gun, this is what you do because that's normal. Nowadays, all of our schools, we have drills to teach kids what to do when they come in to kill you. And that we'll accept in this country as just a normal way we're going to raise the next generation? I mean, some of this stuff, how traumatizing is that for kids? Now, look, you got to be my age to remember when we used to go underneath the desks to prepare for the atomic bombs being dropped on us. Anyone who's done that, you've never forgotten it. But it didn't happen that often that you had to go under. They did it like once a year. You can't run these school safety drills once a year. You have to remind kids all the time that they might be coming to kill you. Only one place in the industrialized world lives like that. It's our country right now. And you talk about toxic stress and how we've just accepted this as a standard. The environment, I've heard a lot about the environment. It doesn't surprise me that you actually see differences when folks grow up in places that look nice, that have green space, fresh air, no smells of decay and rot. It doesn't surprise me what that feels like. I'll tell you one other thing I want people to remember, though. Sometimes in the helping profession, if you're not willing to take the time to actually figure out what's happened to a child, you might treat the child for something that isn't really causing that kid to be sick. And every time, and this is one of the reasons I say to people in poor communities, you have to really take your time to understand what's really going on, because you can jump to snap conclusions. Now, I had a social worker work for us. There was a family, pretty sure they were undocumented. Didn't really matter to us in the work we were doing with our families in New York City. There was a boy and two sisters, and the boy, call him Jose, that's not his real name. He was about 8, and he had a sister, one was 6, one was 5. The mother was working, and the kids were coming to our program after school until the mother gets home from work. And then he would be responsible for taking his sisters home, which I thought was so cute. Here's this little boy trying to get his sisters to hold his hands across the street. They don't want to hold his hand. We're watching that. One day, a social worker comes to me and tells me, look, Jose is having some real emotional problems, Jeff. There's something serious is going on with him. I think we need to take him to the hospital. I said, well, what's going on? He's hearing voices. He's talking out loud to people who aren't there. I was like, really? I was like, but I saw him like 4 weeks ago. He seemed fine. He was like, no, there's something going on. So he wanted to take him to the doctors, and I said, no, don't take him in because I'm not sure what kind of medical care he's going to get, but let's try and have you been by the house? He said, no, I haven't been by the house. I said, well, go by the house, talk to the mother, find out what's going on. He comes back from the house, and he's literally ashen when he comes back to see me. And I said, what happened? He said, well, I was in the house, and we were talking in the bedroom. He said, they don't really have a living room area. And first of all, the door is broken. So you can't lock the door, and this is not a place you would want to have an unlocked door. And he said, well, I was sitting there. I kept hearing this ripping sound. I said, ripping? He said, yeah, I heard some paper tearing. It was paper. And he said, so I looked around, but they were ignoring it. They were just talking to me. The mother was sitting there with the kids. And he said, after a while, it was so loud that I just got up and I said, what is that? And I looked in the kitchen, he said, and I could see two big rats tearing open the paper where the chicken was, and they were pulling the chicken behind the stove. And he said, when I said to the mother, what's going on? She said the apartment was infested. She said that it was the only place she had to live. If she lost this place, they were going to take her children. And so Jose's job was to stay up at night and keep the rats from biting the sisters so the mother could sleep and go to work. And this kid hadn't had a good night's sleep in 3 or 4 weeks. And he was sitting half asleep, saying stuff half in dreams. And if he had gone to see medical doctor, chances are they'd have put him on medication thinking he was heading towards some kind of schizophrenic break. And all they needed was help. They needed help. 15 years later, I was walking in Midtown, and this young man, he was all dressed, professional, had his briefcase, stopped me, and he said, Mr. Canada, you remember me? And I always lie to the kids to tell them, sure, I remember you. And it was Jose. It was Jose. As soon as I saw his smile, I knew who it was. And I asked him how he was. He was doing great. I asked him about his sisters. Oh, they're going to college. They were working. They were doing good. And I just said to myself, there are things that happen in your life sometimes that at these points that you need help, if you don't get it, your life could be destroyed. And there are a lot of kids who need help. They need somebody right now to help them. And many of them are not getting it. And sometimes they're getting the wrong kind of help. If you don't recognize what the trauma is in a kid's life and deal with that trauma, you'll end up treating the wrong thing. The last thing I want to say is that I want to go back to why this issue of toxic stress is so important to me. And a lot of it has to do with my own experience and the experience of my brothers growing up. But some of it has to do with the fact that I knew that we needed to build a better system of support for children and families in this country. And we needed to recognize that these kids are vulnerable. So in 1992, I received the Heroes Award. Robin Hood gives a Heroes Award each year. And it was the first time I ever wrote about what I now know is the toxic stress. I didn't have a name for it right then. I think Nadine talks about the bear and what happens. I talked about monsters and what happens. And so it's a little dated. It was, quite a while ago. But I want to read what I wrote about this issue 26 years ago in a speech that the New York Times later reprinted it as an op-ed under the heading Monsters. And this was at the Heroes of the Year Award. You're probably going to be a little concerned when I tell you how happy I am to be honored as a children's hero. Some people might be a little more modest and say, don't call me a hero. I'm not worthy of such flattery. But not me. I desperately want to be a children's hero. You see, children in the city need heroes because heroes summons up images of supernatural powers. Heroes were meant to slay dragons and monsters, and for far too many of our children, they face monsters every day. Now, I'm not speaking metaphorically, I'm talking about the real thing. Frankenstein, Dracula, the mummy, real monsters. If you calculate the number of deaths these three monsters cause on any given night, it doesn't compare to an average Friday night in New York City. In 1991, for example, there were about 12 murders on each weekend. Plus, these children really did not see, plus these monsters really did not see children as their targets. Well, that's not entirely true. Frankenstein threw the girl in the pond when he ran out of flowers. By the way, if you're not over 50, you don't even get that reference. But even his intent was not to kill children. So the images we have of monsters actually pale in comparison to the reality that many of our children face. Our children face monsters who kill in the night and the day, monsters who lurk in the dark. They see monsters on their way to school, in the park, in the hallways at night. Monsters who leave traces of their brutal work, staining floors and walls, the vestiges of which tell of horrors unspeakable to such young minds. Our children know that we cannot see the monsters, not really, because if we saw them, we would certainly protect them. What group of men and women would sacrifice their children to monsters? I do this work because I haven't forgotten about the monsters. I remember them. I remember being small, vulnerable, and scared. I remember growing up in the South Bronx when I was 7 and we were cooking potatoes in a hole in the ground in the backyard, which was really an empty lot behind our tenement. Urban campfire boys or something like that. We would buy the potatoes for 5 cents and it would buy enough for the group of us. We thought this was the greatest of fun. Suddenly, some man who was crazy or drunk or evil or just a monster burst on us screaming and grabbing and yelling. We all ran for our very lives and hit the fence and climbed over. All but one boy, William. He was obese, he was slow, he got caught. The monster beat him bad. We never found out why or who it was or what it was all about. The thing about monsters is that sometimes they need no reason to act, and we children learned that our survival depended on running fast and climbing fences because monsters can't climb fences fast. Now, why is that? It's true, you know. Ask any child who knows how to run from monsters, and they will tell you they can't climb over fences as quick as little boys and girls can. And how hard we practice, my friends and I, in the afternoon and early evenings, running through alleys, climbing over fences, learning our monster drill. Run, run, fast, fast, hit the fence, over quick, over quick. Come on now, you could be caught. And then there was a young boy named Malcolm, just a little boy whose only distinction was that he was the poorest among us and the nicest. Malcolm was just out rolling a tire, doing nothing bad, when the monster yelled out of the window. He laughed, kept playing. The monster came down and shot Malcolm. And we learned that monsters sometimes come down the stairs. When I think about growing up in the Bronx, I think about the need for heroes. And monsters are everywhere. Sometimes they deprive families of heat in the winter. They don't fix their sinks and their toilets. They let garbage pile up in the hallways. They kick them out of their homes. They beat them sometimes to death. And if I can be a hero today, then I want what every hero wants. I want to ride into town with the troops on a big, bold horse, having vanquished the evil, the monster's head held high on a lance, and the children looking out the window saying, "He killed the monster, come out, come out." The children would run out of the streets and cheer, and they wouldn't have to look under the stairs, and they wouldn't have to dodge bullets and the glass and the filth. Their homes would be happy and their bellies full, and they would have love and laughter in their lives, and they would forget there ever were monsters. Their nightmares would be things of dreams. The monsters would be on television where you could change the channel or cover your eyes or hide under your mother's arm, not daring to look. And children would have mittens and boots and happy holidays, and they would get up in the morning to smiles and go to school and worry about the multiplication tables and telling time, and not about monsters. I wrote that in '92, hoping that somebody would recognize that our kids were growing up in a country where many of them did not have a chance. You didn't hear me say anything about reading scores or test scores or graduation rates. I talk what a child in this country should expect, what they should be able to get from us. So I would like to leave you with this image. 26 years later, we have a generation of children that have grown up in the zone. Bettina and I were at the celebration for Barry T. Brazelton, who just passed away. I was going to speak at his 100th birthday celebration, and he lived to be 99 and a half. I'd like to claim that number. That's a good number. But what I was going to say to Barry is what I will tell you all. When we knew to start early, as early as possible with children. We knew that we should start from birth, and we looked for the best to help us. And Barry helped us create our baby college. And we told Barry, we're going to stay with these kids through preschool, through elementary school, through middle school, through high school. We're going to get these kids in college. We're going to graduate them from college. So 20 years later, I wanted to go and tell Barry, it's been done. Those kids whose parents, they were pregnant when he first started coming to the zone. They had kids who were 1 and 2. Those kids have graduated high school. They're now in college. We have over 850 of our kids in college. And we have a pipeline of 13,000 kids. We're raising those kids in a safe community. Anyone's been to Harlem recently? Look around, see what that place looks like, see what it feels like, see what it smells like. Our kids are doing better than, you can look at black kids, white kids, doesn't matter. They're graduating college at higher rates than all those groups. It took a generation. It doesn't mean that our kids still don't have to deal with the challenges of toxic stress. Doesn't mean that at all. All it means is that we've set up a system of supports for children, their health, their physical health, their mental health, their spiritual health, their artistic health. We've tried to create for them a zone where these kids can live out their childhoods with happy memories. We want them to think about the beautiful facilities, the great trips, the opportunities to play sports and to dance and music. That's what we want for our kids. My hope is that those of you who are doing this science right now, you've got to work quicker, right? We got to come out with this evidence. We've got to make this the standard. This should not be the exception. People still think this is the exception. People still think, oh my God, Jeff, I can't believe you do all of that for kids. That is nothing. That is nothing. in terms of what our kids deserve in this country. So we feel like those of us who are on the front lines doing the work, we wish you all Godspeed. Let's get that science done. Let's change this country. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. I think we started and ended with inspirational talks, and Matt Olson will now give a few closing remarks.
Wow. Well, I mean, really is an honor to be up here and to have the opportunity to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who's participated, the speakers for just sort of the breadth and the depth. I think the sort of the perspective that we've gotten from clinicians and scientists, from parents and policymakers, from those who really sort of lived the experience that we are trying to impact. And I particularly want to thank, obviously Leeway, people in the Picower Institute, everyone in the JPB that's made this possible. I mean, a lot of work went into this, but I really want to thank Barbara and the JPB for not just this event, but for what they do for children, for child health and well-being. I can't think of anything that is more important and more impactful. And I'm just reflecting on what Geoffrey said. As a parent, as a grandparent, the things that I want for my children, for my grandchildren, I have an obligation to make sure that all children have. And for those that are actually working to make that happen, I just want to applaud you. So it's just, so thank you. I also want to close with some final words. This is I kind of started with Geoffrey's words, but I want to close with Nadine's words that are both inspirational but also aspirational. And when she was sort of pointing out the problems and what need to be done, what she said was, we can do this. We can do this. And I hope you all share my belief after hearing all of this and after everything all the speakers have done. I believe, yes, we can. So I'll close with that and just thank you all for coming. I wish you a safe journey home, and I hope you join us for the reception afterward. Thank you all.